You're listening to The Oath of the Vayuputras by Amish. To the late Dr. Manoj Vyas, my father-in-law. Great men never die. They live on in the hearts of their followers. Har Har Mahadev. All of us are Mahadevs. All of us are gods. For his most magnificent temple, finest mosque, and greatest church exist within our souls. The Shiva Trilogy. Shiva, the Mahadev, the god of gods, destroyer of evil, passionate lover, fierce warrior, consummate dancer, charismatic leader, all-powerful yet incorruptible, quick of wit and of temper. No foreigner who came to India, be he conqueror, merchant, scholar, ruler, traveler, believed that such a great man could ever have existed in reality. They assumed he must have been a mythical god, a fantasy conjured within the realms of human imagination. And over time, sadly, this belief became our received wisdom. But what if we are wrong? What if Lord Shiva was not simply a figment of a rich imagination, but a person of flesh and blood like you and me? A man who rose to become godlike as the result of his karma. That is the premise of the Shiva Trilogy, which attempts to interpret the rich mythological heritage of ancient India, blending fiction with historical fact. The Immortals of Meluha was the first book in a trilogy that chronicles the journey of this extraordinary hero. The story was continued in the second book, The Secret of the Nagas, and it will all end in the book that you are holding, The Oath of the Vayuputras. This is a fictional series that is a tribute to my God. I found him after spending many years in the wilderness of atheism. I hope you will find your God as well. It doesn't matter in what form we find him, so long as we do find him eventually. Whether he comes to us as Shiva, or Vishnu, or Shakti Ma, or Allah, or Jesus Christ, or Buddha, or any other of his myriad forms, he wants to help us. Let us allow him to do so. Yadyat karma karomi tatadhakalam shambho tavardharam. My Lord Shambho, my Lord Shiva, every act of mine is a prayer in your honor. Acknowledgements. I hadn't imagined I would ever become an author. The life that I live now, a life spent in pursuits like writing, praying, reading, debating, and traveling, actually feels surreal at times. There are many who have made this dream possible, and I'd like to thank them. My Lord Shiva, my God, for bringing me back to a spiritual life. It is the biggest high possible. Neil, my son, a rejuvenating elixir, who would regularly come and ask me while I was obsessively writing this book, Dad, aapka ho gaya kya? Preeti, my wife, Bhavna, my sister, Himanshu, my brother-in-law, Anish and Ashish, my brothers, Donetta, my sister-in-law. They have worked so closely with me that many times I feel that it isn't just my book, but a joint project, which just happens to have my name on it. The rest of my family, Usha, Vinay, Meeta, Sharnaz, Smita, Anuj, and Ruta, for always being there for me. Sharvani Pandit, my editor, she has battled severe health troubles without asking for any sympathy. And despite the trying times she went through, she helped me fulfill my karma. I am lucky to have her. Rashmi Pusalkar, the designer of this book's cover. She's been a partner from the first book. In my humble opinion, she's one of the best book cover designers in Indian publishing. Gautam Padmanabhan, Satish Sundaram, Anushri Banerjee, Paul Vinay Kumar, Vipin Vijay, Renuka Chatterjee, Deepthi Talwar, Krishna Kumar Nair, and the fantastic team at Westland, my publishers. They have shown commitment and understanding that very few publishers show towards their authors. Anuj Bahari, my agent, a typical large-hearted, boisterous Punjabi, a man brought to me by fate to help me achieve my dreams. Sangram Survey, Shalini Iyer, and the team at Think Why Not, the advertising and digital marketing agency for the book. I have worked with many advertising agencies in my career, including some of the biggest multinationals. Think Why Not ranks right up there amongst the best. Chandan Kauli, the photographer for the cover. He did a brilliant job as always. Also, Atul Pargaonkar for fabricating the bow and arrow. Vinay Salonke for the makeup. Ketan Karande, the model. Jafet Batista for the concept art for the background. The Little Red Zombies team, and Xing Lei Chua for support on 3D elements and scene setup. Sagar Pusalkar and team for the post-processing work on the images. Julian Dubois for coordinating production. I hope you like the cover they have created. I loved it. Omendu Prakash, Biju Gopal and Swapnil Patil for my photograph that has been printed in this book. Their composition was exceptional. The model regrettably left a lot to be desired. Chandramauli Upadhyay, Shukantala Upadhyay and Vedshri Upadhyay from Benares. Shantanu Ghosh Roy and Sweta Basu Ghosh Roy from Singapore for their hospitality while I wrote this book. Mohan Vijayan, a friend whose advice on media matters is something I always treasure. Rajesh Lalwani and the Blogworks team, a digital agency which works with my publisher, for their strong support in an area I don't understand too well. Anuja Chaudhary and the WizSpeak team, the PR agency of my publisher, for the effective campaigns they've implemented. Dr. Ramiyar Karanjia for his immense help in understanding the philosophies of Zoroastrianism. Purnima, an old friend, for her impeccable legal advice. Caleb, a new friend, for working with me on my film deals. And last, but certainly not least, you, the reader. Thank you from the depths of my being for the support you've given to the first 2 books of the Shiva Trilogy. I hope I can give you a sense of completion with this concluding book. Chapter 1. The Return of a Friend. Before the beginning, blood dribbled into the water, creating unhurried ripples which expanded slowly to the edges of the cistern. Shiva bent over the container as he watched the rippling water distort his reflection. He dipped his hands in the water and splashed some on his face, washing off the blood and gore. Recently appointed chief of the Gunas, he was in a mountain village far from the comforts of the Mansarovar lake. It had taken his tribe 3 weeks to get there, despite the punishing pace he had set. The cold was bone-chilling, but Shiva didn't even notice. Not because of the heat that emanated from the Pakriti huts that were being gutted by gigantic flames, but because of the fire that burned within. Shiva wiped his eyes and stared at his reflection in the water. Raw fury gripped him. Yahya, the Pakriti chieftain, had escaped. Shiva controlled his breathing, still recovering from the exhaustion of combat. He thought he saw his uncle, Manubhu's bloodied body in the water. Shiva reached out below the surface of the water with his hand. "Uncle!" The mirage vanished. Shiva squeezed his eyes shut. The macabre moment when he had found his uncle's body replayed in his mind. Manubhu had gone to discuss a peace treaty with Yahya, hoping the Pakritis and Gunas would end their incessant warmongering. When he hadn't returned at the appointed time, Shiva had sent out a search party. Manubhu's mutilated body, along with those of his bodyguards, had been found next to a goat trail on the way to the Pakriti village. A message had been written in blood on a rock next to where Manubhu had breathed his last. "Shiva, forgive them. Forget them. Your only true enemy is evil." All that his uncle wanted was peace, and this is how they repaid him. "Where's Yahya?" Bhadra's scream broke Shiva's chain of thoughts. Shiva turned. The entire Pakriti village was up in flames. Some 30 dead bodies lay strewn across the clearing, brutally hacked by the enraged Gunas seeking vengeance for their former chief's death. 5 Pakriti men knelt on the ground, tied together, a continuous rope binding their wrists and feet. Both ends of the rope had been hammered into the ground. The fierce Bhadra, bloodied sword in hand, led the 20 Guna guards. It was impossible for the Pakritis to escape. At a distance, another contingent of Guna warriors guarded the shackled Pakriti women and children, unharmed thus far. The Gunas never killed or even hurt women and children. Never. "Where is Yahya?" repeated Bhadra, pointing his sword menacingly at a Pakriti. "We don't know," the Prakriti answered. I swear we don't know. Bhadra dug his sword point into the man's chest, drawing blood. Answer and you shall have mercy. All we want is Yakya. He will pay for killing Manabu. We didn't kill Manabu. I swear on all the mountain gods, we didn't kill him. Bhadra kicked the Prakriti hard. Don't lie to me, you stinking asshole of a yak. Shiva turned away as his eyes scanned the forests beyond the clearing. He closed his eyes. He could still hear his uncle Manabu's words echo in his ears. Anger is your enemy. Control it. Control it. Shiva took deep breaths as he tried to slow down his furiously pounding heart. If you kill us, Yakya will come back and kill all of you, screamed a Prakriti at the end of the rope line. You will never know peace. We shall have the final vengeance. Shut up, Kaina, shouted another Prakriti before turning to Bhadra. Release us. We had nothing to do with it. But the Prakriti seemed to have come unhinged. Shiva, shouted Kaina. Shiva turned. You should be ashamed to call Manabu your uncle, roared Kaina. Shut up, Kaina, screamed all the other Prakritis. But Kaina was beyond caring. His intense loathing for the Gunas had made him abandon his instinct for self-preservation. That coward, he spat. Manabu bleated like a goat as we shoved his intestines and his peace treaty down his throat. Shiva's eyes widened as the rage bubbling under the surface broke through. Screaming at the top of his lungs, he drew his sword and charged. Without breaking a step, he swung viciously as he neared the Prakritis, beheading Kaina in one mighty blow. The severed head smashed into the Prakriti beside him before ricocheting off to the distance. Shiva! Screamed Bhadra. They needed the Prakritis alive if they were to find Yakya. But Bhadra was too disciplined a tribesman to state the obvious. Besides, at that moment, Shiva didn't care. He swirled smoothly, swinging his sword again and again, decapitating the next Prakriti and the next. It was only a matter of moments before 5 beheaded Prakriti bodies lay in the mud, their hearts still pumping blood out of their gaping necks, making it pool around the bodies, almost as though they lay in a lake of blood. Shiva breathed heavily as he stared at the dead, his uncle's voice ringing loudly in his head. Anger is your enemy. Control it. Control it. I have been waiting for you, my friend, said the teacher. He was smiling, his eyes moist. I told you I would go anywhere for you, even to Patal Lok if it would help you. How often had Shiva replayed these words, uttered by the man who stood before him? But he had never fully understood the reference to the land of the demons. Now it all fell into place. The beard had been shaved, replaced by a pencil-thin mustache. The broad shoulders and barrel chest were much better defined. The man must be getting regular exercise. The Janeyu, the holy thread of Brahmin identity, was loosely slung over newly developed muscles. The head remained shaven, but the tuft of hair at the back of the head appeared longer and neater. The deep-set eyes had the same serenity that had drawn Shiva to him earlier. It was his long-lost friend, his comrade in arms, his brother. Brahaspati. It took you a very long time to find me. Brahaspati stepped close and embraced Shiva. I've been waiting for you. Shiva hesitated for a moment before joyously embracing Brahaspati, allowing his emotions to take over. But no sooner had he regained his composure than doubts started creeping into his mind. Brahaspati created the illusion of his death. He allied with the Nagas. He destroyed his life's purpose, the great Mount Mandar. He was the Suryavanshi mole. My brother lied to me. Shiva stepped back silently. He felt Sati's hand on his shoulder in silent commiseration. Brahaspati turned to his students. Children, could you please excuse us? The students immediately rose and left. The only people left in the room were Shiva, Brahaspati, Sati, Ganesh, and Kali. Brahaspati stared at his friend, waiting for the questions. He could sense the hurt and anger in Shiva's eyes. Why? He asked. I thought I would spare you the dreadful personal fate That is the inheritance of the Mahadevs. I tried to do your task. One cannot fight evil and not have its claws leave terrible scars upon one's soul. I wanted to protect you. Shiva's eyes narrowed. Were you fighting evil all by yourself for more than 5 years? Evil is never in a rush, reasoned Brahaspati. It creeps up slowly. It doesn't hide, but confronts you in broad daylight. It gives decades of warnings, even centuries at times. Time is never the problem when you battle evil. The problem is the will to fight it. You say that you've been waiting for me, and yet you hid all traces of yourself. Why? I always trusted you, Shiva, said Brahaspati, but I could not trust all those who were around you. They would have prevented me from accomplishing my mission. I might even have been assassinated had they learned about my plans. My mission, I admit, prevailed over my love for you. It was only when you parted ways with them that I could meet you safely. That's a lie. You wanted to meet me because you needed me for the success of your mission, because you now know you cannot accomplish it by yourself. Brahaspati smiled wanly. It was never meant to be my mission, great Nilkant. It was always yours. Shiva looked at Brahaspati, expressionless. You are partially right, said Brahaspati. I wanted to meet you. No, I needed to meet you. Because I have failed. Coin of good and evil is flipping over, and India needs the Nilkant. It needs you, Shiva. Otherwise, evil will destroy this beautiful land of ours. Shiva, while continuing to stare non-committedly at Brahaspati, asked, The coin is flipping over, you say? Brahaspati nodded. Shiva remembered Lord Manu's words. Good and evil are two sides of the same coin. The Nilkant's eyes widened. The key question isn't, what is evil? The key question is, when does good become evil? When does the coin flip? Brahaspati continued to watch Shiva keenly. Lord Manu's rules were explicit. He could not suggest anything. The Mahadev had to discover and decide for himself. Shiva took a deep breath and ran his hand over his blue throat. It still felt intolerably cold. It seemed as if the journey would have to end where it had begun. What is the greatest good? The good that created this age? The answer was obvious, and therefore the greatest evil was exactly the same thing once it began to disturb the balance. Shiva looked at Brahaspati. Tell me why. Brahaspati remained silent, waiting. The question had to be more specific. Tell me why you think the Somras has tipped over from the greatest good to the greatest evil. Bits and pieces of the wreckage had been dutifully brought by the soldiers for examination by Parvateshwar and Bhagirath, who squatted at a distance. Shiva had asked the Meluhan general and the Ayodhyan prince to investigate the wreckage. They had been tasked with determining the antecedents of the men who had attacked their convoy on the way to Panchavati. Parvateshwar and Bhagirath had stayed behind with 100 soldiers, while the rest of Shiva's convoy had carried on to Panchavati. Parvateshwar glanced at Bhagirath and then turned back to the wooden planks. Slowly but surely, his worst fears were coming true. He turned to look at the 100 Suryavanshi soldiers who stood at a respectable distance, as they had been instructed. He was relieved. It was best if they did not see what had been revealed. The rivets on the planks were clearly Meluhan. I hope Lord Ram has mercy on your soul, Emperor Daksh. He shook his head and sighed. Bhagirath turned towards Parvateshwar, frowning. What happened? Parvateshwar looked at Bhagirath, anger writ large on his face. Meluha has been let down. Its fair name has been tarnished forever. Tarnished by the one sworn to protect it. Bhagirath kept quiet. These ships were sent by Emperor Daksh, Parvateshwar said softly. Bhagirath moved closer, his eyes showing disbelief. What? Why do you say that? These rivets are clearly Meluhan. These ships were built in my land. Bhagirath narrowed his eyes. He had noticed something completely different. and was stunned by the general statement. "Parvateshwar, look at the wood. Look at the casing around the edges." Parvateshwar frowned. He did not recognize the casing. "It improves waterproofing in the joints," said Bhagirath. Parvateshwar looked at his brother-in-law, curious. "This technology is from Ayodhya. Lord Ram be merciful." "Yes, it looks like Emperor Daksh and my weakling father have formed an alliance against the Nilkant." Bhrigu, Daksh and Dilipa were in the Meluhan Emperor's private chambers in Devagiri. Dilipa and Bhrigu had arrived the previous day. "Do you think they have succeeded in their mission, my lord?" asked Dilipa. Daksh seemed remote and disinterested. He felt the intense pain of separation from his beloved daughter Sati. The terrible event at Kashi more than a year ago still haunted him. He'd lost his child, and with it, all the love he ever felt in his heart. A few months ago, Bhrigu had hatched a plan to assassinate the Nilkant along with his entire convoy en route to Panchavati. They had sent 5 ships up the Godavari river to first attack Shiva's convoy and then move on to destroy Panchavati as well. There were to be no survivors who would bear witness to what actually took place. Attacking an unprepared enemy was not unethical. In one fell swoop, all those inimical to them would be destroyed. But it was possible only if Daksh and Dilipa joined hands, as they together had the means as well as the technology. The people of India would be told that the ghastly Nagas had lured the simple and trusting Nilkant to their city and assassinated him. Knowing the significance of simplicity in propaganda, Bhrigu had come up with a new title for Shiva, Bholenath, the Simple One, the one who was easily misled. Laying the blame on the treachery of the Nagas and the simplicity of the Nilkant would mean that Daksh and Dilipa would be spared the backlash, and the hatred for the Nagas would be strengthened manifold. Bhrigu glanced at Daksh briefly and then turned his attention back to Dilipa. The Saptrishi Uttaradhikari seemed to place his trust in Dilipa more than the Meluhan now. "They should have succeeded. We'll soon receive reports from the commander." Dilipa's face twitched. He took a deep breath to calm his nerves. "I hope it is never revealed that we did this. The wrath of my people would be terrible. Killing the Nilkant with this subterfuge." Bhrigu interrupted Dilipa, his voice calm. "He was not the Nilkant. He was an impostor. The Vayuputra Council did not create him. It did not even recognize him." Dilipa frowned. He had always heard rumors, but had never really been sure as to whether the Vayuputras, the legendary tribe left behind by the previous Mahadev, Lord Rudra, actually existed. "Then how did his throat turn blue?" asked Dilipa. Bhrigu looked at Daksh and shook his head in exasperation. "I don't know. It is a mystery. I knew the Vayuputra Council had obviously not created a Nilkant, for they are still debating whether evil has arisen. Therefore, I did not object to the Emperor of Meluha persisting with his search for the Nilkant. I knew there was no possibility of a Nilkant actually being discovered." Dilipa looked stunned. "Imagine my surprise when this endeavor actually led them to an apparent Nilkant. But a blue throat did not mean that he was capable of being the savior. He had not been trained. He had not been educated for his task. He had not been appointed for it by the Vayuputra Council. But Emperor Daksh felt he could control this simple tribal from Tibet and achieve his ambitions for Meluha. I made a mistake in trusting His Highness." Dilipa looked at Daksh, who did not respond to the barb. The Swadvipan Emperor turned back towards the great sage. "In any case, evil will be destroyed when the Nagas are destroyed." Bhrigu frowned. "Who said the Nagas are evil?" Dilipa looked at Bhrigu, nonplussed. "Then what are you saying, my lord? That the Nagas can be our allies?" Bhrigu smiled. The distance between evil and good is a vast expanse in which many can exist without being either, Your Highness. Dilipa nodded politely, not quite understanding Brigo's intellectual abstractions. Wisely though, he kept his counsel. But the Nagas are on the wrong side, continued Brigo. Do you know why? Dilipa shook his head, thoroughly confused. Because they are against the great good. They are against the finest invention of Lord Brahma, the one that is the source of our country's greatness. This invention must be protected at all costs. Dilipa nodded in affirmation. Once again, he didn't understand Brigu's words, but he knew better than to argue with the formidable Maharishi. He needed the medicines that Brigu provided. They kept him healthy and alive. We will continue to fight for India, said Brigu. I will not let anyone destroy the good that is at the heart of our land's greatness. Chapter 2. What is evil? That the Somras has been the greatest good of our age is pretty obvious, said Brahaspati. It has shaped our age. Hence, it is equally obvious that someday it will become the greatest evil. The key question is, when will the transformation occur? Shiva, Sati, Kali and Ganesh were still in Brahaspati's classroom in Panchavati. Brahaspati had declared a holiday for the rest of the day so that their conversation could continue uninterrupted. The legendary 5 banyan trees, after which Panchavati had been named, were clearly visible from the classroom window. As far as I'm concerned, the Somras was evil the moment it was invented, spat out Kali. Shiva frowned at Kali and turned to Brahaspati. Go on. Any great invention has both positive and negative effects. As long as the positive outweighs the negative, one can safely continue to use it. The Somras created our way of life and has allowed us to live longer in healthy bodies. It has enabled great men to keep contributing towards the welfare of society longer than was ever possible in the past. At first, the Somras was restricted to Brahmins, who were expected to use the longer, healthier life, almost a second life, for the benefit of society at large. Shiva nodded. He had heard this story from Daksh many years ago. Later, Lord Ram decreed that the benefits of the Somras should be available to all. Why should Brahmins have special privileges? Thereafter, the Somras was administered to the entire populace, resulting in huge progress in society as a whole. I know all about this, said Shiva. But when did the negative effects start becoming obvious? The first sign was the Nagas, said Brahaspati. There have always been Nagas in India, but they were usually Brahmins. For example, Ravan, Lord Ram's greatest foe, was a Naga and a Brahmin. Ravan was a Brahmin? Asked a shocked Sati. Yes, he was, answered Kali, for every Naga knew his story. The son of a great sage, Vishrava. He was a benevolent ruler, a brilliant scholar, a fierce warrior and a staunch devotee of Lord Rudra. He had some faults, no doubt, but he wasn't evil personified as the people of the Sapt Sindhu would have us believe. In that case, do you people think less of Lord Ram? Asked Sati. Of course not. Lord Ram was one of the greatest emperors ever. We worship him as the 7th Vishnu. His ideas, philosophies and laws are the foundation of the Naga way of life. His reign, Ram Rajya, will always be celebrated across India as the perfect way to run an empire. But you should know that it is believed by some that even Lord Ram did not see Ravan as pure evil. He respected his enemy. Sometimes there can be good people on both sides of a war. Shiva raised his hand to silence them and turned his attention back towards the Meluhan chief scientist. Brahaspati. So the Nagas, though small in number initially, were usually Brahmins, Brahaspati continued. But then the Somras was used only by the Brahmins until then. Today, the connection seems obvious, but it didn't seem so at the time. The Somras created the Nagas? Asked Shiva. Yes, this was discovered only a few centuries ago by the Nagas. I learnt it from them. We didn't discover it, said Kali. The Vayuputra Council told us. The Vayuputra Council? Asked Shiva. Yes, continued Kali. The previous Mahadev, Lord Rudra, left behind a tribe called the Vayuputras. They live beyond the western borders in a land called Pareha, the land of the fairies. I know that, said Shiva, recalling one of his conversations with a Vasudev Pandit, but I hadn't heard of the council. Well, somebody needs to administer the tribe, and the Vayuputras are ruled by their council, which is headed by their chief, who is respected as a god. He is called Mitra. He is advised by the council of 6 wise people, collectively called the Amartya Shpand. The council controls the twin missions of the Vayuputras. Firstly, to help the next Vishnu whenever he appears, and secondly, have one of the Vayuputras trained and ready to become the next Mahadev when the time comes. Shiva raised his eyebrows. You obviously broke that rule, Shiva, said Kali. I'm sure the Vayuputra Council must have been quite shocked when you appeared out of the blue, because quite clearly they did not create you. You mean this is a controlled process? I don't know, said Kali, but your friends will know a lot more. The Vasudevs? Yes. Shiva frowned, reached for Sati's hand, and then asked Kali, So, how did you find out about the Somras creating the Nagas? Did the Vayuputras approach you, or did you find them? I did not find them. The Naga king Vasuki was approached by them a few centuries ago. They suddenly appeared out of nowhere, lugging huge hoards of gold, and offered to pay us an annual compensation. King Vasuki very rightly refused to accept the compensation without an explanation. And he was told that the Nagas were born with deformities as a result of the Somras. The Somras randomly has this impact on a few babies when in the womb, if the parents have been consuming it for a long period. Not all babies. A vast majority of babies are born without deformities, but a few unfortunate ones, like me, are born Naga. Why? I call it dumb luck, said Kali. But King Vasuki believed that the deformities caused by the Somras were the Almighty's way of punishing those souls who had committed sins in their previous births. Therefore, he accepted the pathetic explanation of the Vayuputra Council along with their compensation. Mausi rejected the terms of the agreement with the Vayuputras the moment she ascended the throne, said Ganesh, referring to his aunt Kali. Why? I'm sure the gold could have been put to good use by your people, exclaimed Shiva. Kali laughed coldly. That gold was a mere palliative. Not for us, but for the Vayuputras. Its only purpose was to make them feel less guilty for the carnage being wrought upon us by the great invention that they protected. Shiva nodded, understanding her anger. He turned to Brahaspati. But how exactly is the Somras responsible for this? Brahaspati explained. We used to believe that the Somras blessed one with a long life by removing poisonous oxidants from one's body. But that is not the only way it works. Shiva and Sati leaned closer. It also operates at a more fundamental level. Our body is made up of millions of tiny living units called cells. These are the building blocks of life. Yes, I've heard of this from one of your scientists in Meluha, said Shiva. Then you'd know that these cells are the tiniest living beings. They combine to form organs, limbs, and in fact, the entire body. Right. These cells have the ability to divide and grow, and each division is like a fresh birth. One old unhealthy cell magically transforms into 2 new healthy cells. As long as they keep dividing, they remain healthy. So your journey begins in your mother's womb as a single cell. That cell keeps dividing and growing till it eventually forms your entire body. Yes, said Sati, who had learnt all of this in the Meluha Gurukul. Obviously, said Brahaspati, this division and growth has to end sometime. Otherwise, one's body would keep growing continuously with pretty disastrous consequences. So the Almighty put a limit on the number of times a cell can divide. After that, the cell simply stops dividing further and thus, in effect, becomes old and unhealthy. And do these old cells make one's body age and thus eventually die? Asked Shiva. Yes, every cell reaches its limit on the number of divisions at some point or the other. As more and more cells in the body hit that limit, one grows old and finally dies. Does the Somras remove this limit on division? Yes. Therefore, your cells keep dividing while remaining healthy. In most people, this continued division is regulated. But in a few, some cells lose control over their division process and keep growing at an exponential pace. This is cancer, isn't it? Asked Sati. Yes, said Brahaspati. This cancer can sometimes lead to a painful death. But there are times when these cells continue to grow and appear as deformities, like extra arms or a very long nose. How polite and scientific, said a livid Kali. But one cannot even begin to imagine the physical pain and torture that we undergo as children when these outgrowths occur. Sati stretched out and held her sister's hand. Nagas are born with small outgrowths, which don't seem like much initially, but are actually harbingers of years of torture, continued Kali. It almost feels like a demon has taken over your body, and he's bursting out from within, slowly over many years, causing soul-crushing pain that becomes your constant companion. Our bodies get twisted beyond recognition, so that by adolescence, when further growth finally stops, we're stuck with what Brahaspati politely calls deformities. I call it the wages of sins that we didn't even commit. We pay for the sins others commit by consuming the Somras. Shiva looked at the Naga queen with a sad smile. Kali's anger was justified. And the Nagas have suffered this for centuries? Asked Shiva. Yes, said Brahaspati. As the number of people consuming the Somras grew, so did the number of Nagas. One will find that most of the Nagas are from Meluha, for that is where the Somras is used most extensively. And what is the Vayuputra Council's view on this? I'm not sure, but from whatever little I know, the Vayuputra Council apparently believes that the Somras continues to create good in most areas where it's used. The suffering of the Nagas is collateral damage and has to be tolerated for the larger good. Bullshit, snorted Kali. Shiva could appreciate Kali's rage, but he was also aware of the enormous benefits of Somras over several millennia. On balance, was it still good? He turned to Brahaspati. Are there any other reasons for believing the Somras is evil? Consider this. We Meluhans choose to believe that the Saraswati is dying because of some devious Chandravanshi conspiracy. This is not true. We are actually killing our mother river all by ourselves. We use massive amounts of Saraswati waters to manufacture the Somras. It helps stabilize the mixture during processing. It is also used to churn the crushed branches of the Sanjeevani tree. I have conducted many experiments to see if water from any other source can be used, but it just doesn't do the trick. Does it really require that much water? Yes, Shiva. When Somras was being made for just a few thousand, the amount of Saraswati water used didn't matter. But when we started mass-producing Somras for 8 million people, the dynamics changed. The water started getting depleted slowly by the giant manufacturing facility at Mount Mandar. The Saraswati has already stopped reaching the Western Sea. It now ends its journey in an inland delta, south of Rajasthan. The desertification of the land to the south of this delta is already complete. It's a matter of time before the entire river is completely destroyed. Can you imagine the impact on Meluha, on India? Saraswati is the mother of our entire Sapt-Sindhu civilization, said Sati, speaking of the land of the 7 rivers. Yes, even our preeminent scripture, the Rig Veda, sings paeans to the Saraswati. It's not only the cradle, but also the lifeblood of our civilization. What will happen to our future generations without this great river? The Vedic way of life itself is at risk. What we are doing is taking away the lifeblood of our future progeny so that our present generation can revel in the luxury of living for 200 years or more. Would it be so terrible if we live for only 100 years instead? Shiva nodded. He could see the terrible side effects and the ecological destruction caused by the Somras. But he still couldn't see it as evil. An evil which left only one option, a dharma yudh, or a holy war to destroy it. What else? Asked Shiva. The destruction of the Saraswati seems a small price to pay when compared to another, even more insidious impact of the Somras. Which is? The plague of Branga? Asked a surprised Shiva. What does that have to do with the Somras? Branga had been suffering continuous plagues for many years, which had killed innumerable people, especially children. The primary relief thus far had been the medicine procured from the Nagas, or else exotic medicines extracted after killing the sacred peacock, leading to the Brangas being ostracized even in peace-loving cities like Kashi. Everything, said Brahaspati. The Somras is not only difficult to manufacture, but it also generates large amounts of toxic waste, a problem we have never truly tackled. It cannot be disposed of on land because it can poison entire districts through groundwater contamination. It cannot be discharged into the sea. The Somras waste reacts with salt water to disintegrate in a dangerously rapid and explosive manner. A thought entered Shiva's mind. Did Brahaspati accompany me to Karachapa for the first time to pick up seawater? Was that used to destroy Mount Mandar? Brahaspati continued. What seemed to work was fresh river water. When used to wash the Somras waste over a period of several years, fresh water appeared to reduce its toxic strength. This was proven with some experiments at Mount Mandar. It seemed to work especially well with cold water. Ice was even better. Obviously, we could not use the rivers of India to wash the Somras waste in large quantities. We could have ended up poisoning our own people. Therefore, many decades ago, a plan was hatched to use the high mountain rivers in Tibet. They flow through uninhabited lands and their waters are almost ice cold. They would therefore work perfectly to clean out the Somras waste. There's a river high up in the Himalayas called Sangpo, where Meluha decided to set up a giant waste treatment facility. Are you telling me that the Meluhans have come to my land before? Yes, in secret. But how can such large consignments be hidden? You've seen the quantity of Somras powder required to feed an entire city for a year. 10 small pouches are all it takes. It is converted into the Somras drink at designated temples across Meluha when mixed with water and other ingredients. So, even the waste amount is not huge. No, it isn't. It's a small quantity, making it easy to transport. But even that small quantity packs in a huge amount of poison. So this waste facility was set up in Tibet? Yes, it was established in a completely desolate area along the Sangpo. The river flowed east, so it would go to relatively unpopulated lands away from India. Therefore, our land would not suffer from the harmful effects of the Somras. Shiva frowned. But what about the lands further ahead that the Sangpo flowed into? The eastern lands that lie beyond Swadweep? What about the Tibetan land around Sangpo itself? Wouldn't they have suffered due to the toxic waste? They may have, said Brahaspati, but that was considered acceptable collateral damage. The Meluhans kept track of the people living along the Sangpo. There were no outbreaks of disease, no sudden deformities. The icy river waters seemed to be working at keeping the toxins inactive. The Vayuputra Council was given these reports. Apparently, the council also sent scientists into the sparsely populated lands of Burma, which is to the east of Swadweep. It was believed the Sangpo flowed into those lands and became the main Burmese river, the Irrawaddy. Once again, there was no evidence of a sudden rise in diseases. Hence, it was concluded that we had found a way to rid ourselves of the Somras waste without harming anyone. When it was discovered that Sangpo means purifier in the local Tibetan tongue, it was considered a sign, a divine message. A solution had been found. This came down to the scientists of Mount Mandar as received wisdom as well. What does this have to do with the Brangas? Well, you see, the upper regions of the Brahmaputra have never been mapped properly. It was simply assumed that the river comes from the east because it flows west into Branga. The Nagas, with the help of Parshuram, finally mapped the upper course of the Brahmaputra. It falls at almost calamitous speeds from the giant heights of the Himalayas into the plains of Branga through gorges that are sheer walls almost 2,000 meters high. 2,000 meters! Gasped Shiva. You can well imagine that it is almost impossible to navigate a river course such as the Brahmaputras. But Parshuram succeeded and led the Nagas along that path. Parshuram, of course, did not realize the significance of the discovery of the river's course. Queen Kali and Lord Ganesh did. Did you go up to the Brahmaputra as well? Asked Shiva. Where does the river come from? Is it connected to the Sangpo in any way? Brahaspati smiled sadly. It is the Sangpo. What? The Sangpo flows east only for the duration of its course in Tibet. At the eastern extremities of the Himalayas, it takes a sharp turn, almost reversing its flow. It then starts moving southwest and crashes through massive gorges before emerging near Branga as the Brahmaputra. By the holy lake, said Shiva, the Brangas are being poisoned by the Somras waste. Exactly. The cold waters of the Sangpo dilute the poisonous impact to a degree. However, as the river enters India in the form of the Brahmaputra, the rising temperature reactivates the dormant toxin in the water. Though the Branga children also suffer from the same body-racking pain as the Nagas, they are free from deformities. Sadly, Branga also has a high incidence of cancer. Being highly populous, the number of deaths is simply unacceptable. Shiva began to connect the dots. Devadas told me the Branga plague peaks during the summer every year. That is the time when the ice melts faster in the Himalayas, making the poison flow out in larger quantities. Yes, said Brahaspati. That is exactly what happens. Obviously, since both the Nagas and Brangas are being poisoned by the same malevolence, our medicines work on the Brangas as well, Kali spoke up. So we send them our medicines to help ameliorate their suffering a little. Even though we told King Chandraketu how his kingdom was being poisoned, some Brangas prefer to believe that the plague strikes every year because of a curse that the Nagas have cast upon them. If only we were that powerful. But it appears that at least Chandraketu believes us. That is why he sends us men and gold regularly to stealthily attack Somras manufacturing facilities, the root of all our problems. Evil should never be fought with subterfuge, Kali, said Shiva. It must be attacked openly. Kali was about to retort, but Shiva had turned back to Brahaspati. Why didn't you say something? Raise the issue in Meluha or with the Vayuputras. I did, said Brahaspati. I took up the matter with Emperor Daksh, but he doesn't really understand scientific things or involve himself with technical details. He turned to the one intellectual he trusts, the venerable royal priest, Rajguru Bhrigu. Lord Bhrigu seemed genuinely interested and took me to the Vayuputra Council so I could present my case before them. But they were not at all supportive. This was where the issue was effectively killed. Nobody was willing to believe me about the source of the Brahmaputra. They also laughed when they heard that I was ostensibly listening to the Nagas. According to them, the Nagas were now ruled by an extremist harridan whose frustration with her own karma made everyone else the object of her ire. I'll take that as a compliment, said Kali. Shiva smiled at Kali before turning back to Brahaspati. But how did the Vayuputras rationalize what's happening in Branga? According to them, said Brahaspati, the Brangas were a rich but uncivilized lot with strange eating habits and disgusting customs. So the plague could have been caused by their bad practices and karma rather than the Somras. Remember, there is little sympathy for the Brangas amongst the Vayuputras because it is well known that they drink the blood of peacocks, a bird that is held holy by any follower of Lord Rudra. And you gave up? Retorted Shiva. Shouldn't you have pressed on? Emperor Daksha is weak and can easily be influenced. He could have brought about changes in Meluha. The Vayuputra Council does not govern your country. Well, there was a good reason for me to not persist with the argument. What reason? Tara, the woman I intended to marry, suddenly went missing, continued Brahaspati. The last time I saw her, she was in Pariha. On returning to Meluha, I received a letter from her, telling me that she was disappointed with my tirades against the Somras. I asked Lord Brigu to check with his friends in Pariha. I was told that she'd just disappeared. Shiva frowned. I know it sounds lame, said Brahaspati, but somewhere deep within, I do believe Tara was taken hostage. It was a message for me. Keep quiet or else. And you gave up, Shiva repeated. Why would you do that if you believed you were right? I didn't, continued Brahaspati defensively. But by then I was losing credibility amongst the senior scientists of other realms. Had I made the issue any bigger within Meluha, I would have lost what little standing I have amongst the Surya Vanshis as well. I would have lost my ability to do anything at all. Though I knew I had to do something, I also realized that the strategy of open lobbying and debate had become counterproductive. There were too many vested interests tied into the Somras. Only the Vayuputra Council could have had the moral strength to stop it openly through the institution of the Nilkant, but they refused to believe that the Somras had turned evil. What happened thereafter? Asked Shiva. I opted for silence, said Brahaspati, at least on the surface. But I had to do something. Maharishi Bhrigu was convinced there was nothing to fear from the Somras waste. So the manufacturing of Somras continued at the same frantic pace. The Saraswati kept getting prodigiously consumed. Somras waste was being generated in huge quantities. Since the empire now believed that cold fresh water had worked in disposing of the toxic waste, new plans were being drawn up to use other rivers. This time the idea was to use the upper reaches of either the Indus or the Ganga. Lord Ram, be merciful, whispered Shiva. Millions of lives would have been at risk. We were going to unleash toxic waste right through the heart of India. Almost as a message from the Paramatma, the ultimate soul, I was approached by Lord Ganesh around this time. He had formulated a plan, and I must admit his words made eminent sense. There could only be one possible solution: the destruction of Mount Mandar. Without Mount Mandar, there would be no Somras, and with the Somras gone, all these problems would disappear too. Shiva cast a quick look towards Sati. Whatever little doubts I may have had, said Brahaspati, disappeared when I was confronted with a new scenario. When it happened, I knew in my heart that it was time for the destruction of evil. What new scenario? Asked Shiva. You appeared on the scene, answered Brahaspati. Even without the Vayuputra Council's permission, perhaps even without their knowledge, the Nilkant had appeared. It was a final sign for me. The time to destroy evil was upon us. Vishwadumna quickly gave hand signals to his Branga soldiers. The hunting party went down on their knees. Karthik, who was right behind Vishwadumna, whistled softly as his eyes lit up. Magnificent! Vishwadumna turned towards Karthik. While most of Shiva's convoy was settling itself into the visitors' camp outside Panchavati, a few hunting parties had been sent out to gather meat for the large entourage. Karthik, having proved himself as an accomplished hunter throughout the journey to Panchavati, was the natural leader of one of the groups. Vishwadumna had accompanied the son of the Nilkant. He intensely admired the fierce warrior skills of Karthik. It's a rhinoceros, my lord, said Vishwadumna softly. The rhinoceros was a massive animal, nearly 4 meters in length. It had bumpy brownish skin that hung over its body in multiple layers, suggestive of tough armor. Its most distinctive feature was its nasal horn, which stuck out like a fearsome offensive weapon to a height of nearly 50 centimeters. I know, whispered Karthik. They live around Kashi as well. They're nearly as big as a small elephant. These beasts have terrible eyesight, but they have a fantastic sense of smell and hearing. Vishwadumna nodded at Karthik, impressed. What do you propose, my lord?" The rhinoceros was a tricky beast to hunt. They were quiet animals who kept to themselves, but if threatened, they could charge wildly. Few could survive a direct blow from their massive body and terrifying horn. Karthik reached over his shoulder and drew out the two swords sheathed on his back. In his left hand was a short twin blade, like the one his elder brother Ganesh favored. In his right was a heavier one with a curved blade, which was certainly not appropriate for thrusting. This weapon was perfect for swinging and slashing, a style of fighting Karthik excelled at. Karthik spoke softly. "Fire arrows at its back. Make as much noise as you can. I want you to drive it forward." Vishwadumna's eyes filled with terror. "That is not wise, my lord. This animal is huge. Too many soldiers charging in will cramp us. All it would need to do is swing its mighty horn, and it would cause several casualties." "But we can fire arrows to kill it from a distance." Karthik raised his eyebrows. "Vishwadumna, you should know better. Do you really think our arrows can actually penetrate deep enough to cause serious damage? It's not the arrows, but the noise that you will create which will make it charge." Vishwadumna continued to stare, still unsure. "Also, it's standing upwind, and your positioning behind it would be perfect. Along with the noise, the stench of your soldiers will also drive the animal forward. It's a good thing they haven't bathed in 2 days," said Karthik, without any hint of a smile at the joke. Like all warriors, Vishwadumna admired humor in the face of danger. But he checked his smile, not sure if Karthik was joking. "What will you do, my lord?" Karthik whispered, "I'll kill the beast." Saying this, Karthik slowly edged forward, right onto the path that the bull would charge on when attacked by Vishwadumna's soldiers. The soldiers, meanwhile, moved upwind behind the rhinoceros. Having reached his position, Karthik whistled softly. "Now!" shouted Vishwadumna. A volley of arrows attacked the animal as the soldiers began to scream loudly. The rhinoceros raised its head, ears twitching as the arrows bounced harmlessly off its skin. As the soldiers drew closer, some of the missiles managed to penetrate enough to agitate the beast. The animal snorted mightily and stomped the dirt, radiating strength and power as light gleamed off its tiny black eyes. It lowered its head and charged, its feet thundering against the ground. Karthik was in position. The beast only had side vision and could not see straight ahead. Therefore, it was no surprise that it crashed into an overhanging branch in its path, which made it change its direction slightly. At which point, it saw Karthik standing to its right. The furious rhinoceros bellowed loudly, changed course back to the original path, and charged straight towards the diminutive son of Shiva. Karthik remained stationary and calm, with his eyes focused on the beast. His breathing was regular and deep. He knew that the rhinoceros couldn't see him since he stood straight ahead. The animal was running, guided by the memory of where it had seen Karthik last. Vishwadumna fired arrows into the animal rapidly, hoping to slow it down. But the thick hide of the beast ensured that the arrows did not make too much of a difference. It was running straight towards Karthik. Yet Karthik didn't move or flinch. Vishwadumna could see the boy warrior holding his swords lightly. That was completely wrong for a stabbing action, where the blade needs to be firmly held. The weapon would just fall out of his hands the moment he thrust forward. Just when it appeared that he was about to be trampled underfoot, Karthik bent low and, with lightning speed, rolled towards the left. As the rhinoceros continued running, he slashed out, his left sword first, pressing the lever on the hilt as he swung. One of the twin blades extended out of the other, slicing through the front thigh of the beast, cutting through muscles and veins. As blood spurted rapidly, the animal's injured leg collapsed from under it, and it grunted, confused, trying to put weight on the appendage, now flopping uselessly against its belly. Admirably, it still continued its charge, its 3 good legs heaving against its bulk as it struggled to turn and face its attacker. Karthik ran forward, following the movement of the animal, now circling in from behind the beast. He hacked brutally with his right hand, which held the killer curved sword. The blade sliced through the thigh of the hind leg, cutting down to the bone with its deep curvature and broad metal. With both its right legs incapacitated, the rhinoceros collapsed to the ground, rolling sideways as it tried to stand with only two good legs, writhing in pain. Its blood mixed with the dusty earth to make a dark red-brown mud that smeared across its body as it flailed against the ground, panting in fear. Karthik stood quietly at a short distance, watching the animal in its final throes. Vishwadhamna watched from behind, his mouth agape. He had never seen an animal brought down with such skill and speed. Karthik approached the rhinoceros calmly. Even though immobilized, the beast reared its head menacingly at him, grunting and whining in a high-pitched squeal. Karthik maintained a safe distance as the other soldiers rapidly ran up to him. The son of the Nilkant bowed low to the animal. "Forgive me, magnificent beast. I am only doing my duty. I will finish this soon." Suddenly, Karthik moved forward and stabbed hard, right through the folds of the rhinoceros's skin, plunging deep into the beast's heart, feeling the shudder go through its body, until at last it was still. "My lord, a bird courier has just arrived with a message for your eyes only," said Kanakla, the Meluhan Prime Minister. "That's why I brought it personally." Daksha occupied his private chambers, a worried Virani seated beside him. He took the letter from Kanakla and dismissed her. With a polite namaste towards her emperor and empress, Kanakla turned to leave. Glancing back, she glimpsed a rare intimate moment between them as they held each other's hands. The last few months had inured her to the strange goings-on in Meluha. Daksha's past betrayal of Sati during her first pregnancy had shocked her enormously. Kanakla had lost all respect for her emperor. She continued with her job because she remained loyal to Meluha. She had even stopped questioning the strange orders from her lord, like the one he'd given the previous day about making arrangements for Bhrigu and Dilipa to travel to the ruins of Mount Mandar. She could understand Maharishi Bhrigu's interest in going there, but what earthly reason could there be for the Sudipan emperor to go as well? Kanakla saw Daksha letting go of Virani's hand and breaking the seal of the letter as she shut the door quietly behind her. Daksha began to cry. Virani immediately reached over and snatched the letter from him. As she read through it quickly, Virani let out a deep sigh of relief as tears escaped from her eyes. "She's safe. They're all safe." On the surface, the plan to assassinate the Nilkant worked towards the unique interests of all the three main conspirators, Maharishi Bhrigu, Emperor Daksha, and Emperor Dilipa. For Bhrigu, the greatest gain would be that the Somras would not be targeted by the Nilkant. The faith of the people in the legend of the Nilkant was strong. If the Nilkant declared that the Somras was evil and decided to toe the Naga line, so would his followers. For Dilipa, it meant the killing of two birds with a single stone. Not only would he continue to receive the elixir from Bhrigu, but he'd also do away with Bhagirath, his heir and greatest threat. Daksha would be rid of the troublesome Nilkant and be able to blame all ills on the Nagas once again. The plan was perfect, except that Daksha could not countenance the killing of his daughter. He was willing to put everything on the line to ensure that Sati was left unharmed. Bhrigu and Dilipa had hoped that with the rupture in relations between Daksha and his daughter, the Meluhan emperor would support this mission wholeheartedly. They were wrong. Daksha's love for Sati was deeper than his hatred for Shiva. Upon Virani's advice, Daksha had sent the Arishtanemi brigadier, Maheshrenik, known for his blind loyalty to Meluha and deep devotion to the Nilkant, on a secret mission. Maheshrenik was to accompany the 5 ships that had been sent to attack the Nilkant's convoy. Virani had covertly kept in touch with her daughter Kali through all these years of strife and had made Daksha aware of the river warning and defense system of the Nagas. All that had to be done was to get the alarm triggered in time. Maheshrenik's mission was to ensure that the alarms went off. He was to escape and return to Meluha after that. The Arishtanemi brigadier, an acting general of the Meluhan army, had carried a homing pigeon with him to deliver the news of the subsequent battle to Daksha. The happy message for the Meluhan emperor was that the progeny Daksh cared for, Sati and Kartik, were alive and safe. Virani looked at her husband. "If only you would listen to me a bit more." Daksh breathed deeply. "If Lord Brigu ever finds out..." "Would you rather your children were dead?" Daksh sighed. He would do anything to ensure Sati's safety. He shook his head. "No, then thank the Paramatma that our plan worked, and never breathe a word of this to anyone, ever." Daksha nodded. He took the letter from Virani and set it aflame, holding it by the edge for as long as possible to ensure that every part of it had charred beyond recognition. Chapter 3. The Kings Have Chosen. "Do you believe Brahaspati?" asked Shiva. Night had fallen on the Panchavati guest colony just outside the main city. Injured and fatigued, Shiva's entourage had retired to their quarters for a well-deserved rest. Sati and Shiva were in their chambers, having just returned from the city. They had not spoken to a soul about what they'd learned at the Panchavati school. They had not even told the Suryavanshis that Brahaspati, their beloved chief scientist, was still alive. They were to meet him again the next day. "Well, I don't think Brahaspati ji is lying," said Sati. "I do remember that more than 2 decades ago, Lord Brigu had spent many months in Devagiri, which was highly unusual for the Rajguru. He's a rare sight in Meluha, since he usually chooses to spend his time meditating in his Himalayan cave." "Aren't Rajgurus supposed to stay in the royal palace and guide the kings?" "Not someone like Lord Brigu. He helped my father get elected as emperor because he believed my father would be good for Meluha. Beyond that, Lord Brigu has had no interest in the day-to-day governance of Meluha. He's a simple man, rarely seen in the so-called powerful circles." "So, he spent a lot of time in Devagiri. That may have been unusual, but what about the other things that Brahaspati said?" "Well, Lord Brigu, my father and Brahaspati ji were indeed away for many months. It had been announced as an important trade trip. But I can't imagine Lord Brigu or Brahaspati ji being interested in trade. Perhaps they were in Pareha at the time. And yes, the talented and lovely Taraji, who worked at Mount Mandar and had been sent to Pareha for a project, did disappear suddenly. It was announced that she had taken sannyas. Renouncing public life is very common in Meluha. But what Brahaspati ji revealed today was something else altogether." "So, you believe Brahaspati speaks the truth?" "All I'm saying is that Brahaspati ji may believe this to be the truth. But is it actually so, or is he mistaken? This decision of yours can change the course of history. What you do now will have repercussions for generations to come. It's a momentous occasion, a big battle. You have to be completely sure." "I must speak with the Vasudevs." "You must."
But that is not all you wanted to say to me, is it?
I think there is another aspect to be considered. What made Brahaspati ji disappear for over 5 years? What was he doing in Panchavati all this while? I feel this is an important question, perhaps linked to the backup manufacturing facility for the Somras that father had told me about.
Yes, I didn't give it much importance then. But if the Somras is evil, that facility is the key.
Actually, the Saraswati is the key. A manufacturing facility can always be rebuilt, but wherever it is built, it will always need the Saraswati waters. Kali told me at Chawar that her people attacked Meluhan temples and Brahmins only if they were directly harming the Nagas. Maybe those temples were production centers that used the powder from Mount Mandar to manufacture the Somras drink for the locals. She also said that a final solution would emerge from the Saraswati, that the Nagas were working on it. I don't know what that cryptic statement meant. We need to find out.
You did not tell me about your conversation with Kali.
Shiva, this is the first honest conversation we are having about Kali and Ganesh since you met my son at Kashi. Shiva became quiet. I'm not blaming you, continued Sati. I understood your anger. You thought that Ganesh had killed Brahaspati ji. Now that the truth has emerged, you're willing to listen.
Shiva smiled and embraced Sati. "Are you sure?" asked Sati. It was late the next morning, 4 hours into the second prahar. Shiva sat with Sati at his side in his private chambers. Parvateshwar and Bhagirath stood in front, holding a plank. The Meluhan general and the Ayodhyan prince had just returned after surveying the destroyed battleships. "Yes, my lord, the evidence is indisputable," said Bhagirath. "Show me." Bhagirath stepped forward. "The rivets on the planks are clearly Meluhan. Lord Parvateshwar has identified them." Parvateshwar nodded in agreement. "And the casing," continued Bhagirath, "that improves the waterproofing is clearly Ayodhyan." "Are you suggesting that Emperor Daksh and Emperor Dilepa have formed an alliance against us?" Shiva asked softly. "They've used the best technologies available in both our lands. These ships have navigated through a lot of seawater. Judging by the mollusks on them, they needed the best to be able to make the journey quickly." Shiva breathed deeply, lost in thought. "My lord," said Bhagirath, "for all his faults, I cannot imagine my father would be capable of leading a conspiracy such as this. He simply does not have the capability. He's just a follower in this plot. You have to target him, of course, but don't make the mistake of thinking that he is the main conspirator. He's not." Sati leaned towards Shiva. "Do you think my father can do this?" Shiva shook his head. "No, Emperor Daksh too is incapable of leading this conspiracy." Parvateshwar, still shamefaced at the dishonor brought upon his empire, said quietly, "The Meluhan code enjoins upon us to follow the rules, my lord. Our rules bid us to carry out our king's orders. In the hands of a lesser king, this can lead to a lot of wrong." "Emperor Daksh may have issued the orders, Parvateshwar," said Shiva, "but he didn't dream them up. There is a master who has brought the royalty of Meluha and Swadweep together. Someone who also managed to procure the feared Devi Astras. Heaven alone knows if he has any more divine weapons. It was a brilliant plan. By Lord Ram's grace, we were saved by the skin of our teeth. It cannot be Emperor Daksh or Emperor Dilepa. This is someone of far greater importance, intelligence, and resource, and one who is clever enough to conceal his identity." "Return to Meluha?" asked Veerbhadra. Veerbhadra and Kritika were in Shiva's private chambers. Kali and Sati were also present. "Yes, Bhadra," said Shiva. "It was the Meluhans and the Ayodhyans who attacked us together." "Are you sure Meluha is involved?" asked Veerbhadra. "Parvateshwar himself has confirmed it." "And now you are worried about our people?" "Yes," said Shiva. "I'm worried the Gunas will be arrested and held hostage as leverage over us. Before they do so, I want you to slip into Meluha quietly and take our people to Kashi. I will meet you there." "My scouts will guide Kritika and you through a secret route," said Kali. "Using our fastest horses and speediest boats, my people can get you close to Maika in 2 weeks. After that, you're on your own." "Meluha is a safe country to travel in," said Kritika. "We can hire fast horses up to the mouth of the Saraswati. After that, we can travel on boats plying on the river. It's an easy route. With luck, we will reach Devagiri in another 2 weeks. The Gunas are in a small village not far from there." "Perfect," said Shiva. "Time is of the essence. Go now." "Yes, Shiva," said Veerbhadra as he turned to leave with his wife. "And Bhadra," said Shiva. Veerbhadra and Kritika turned around. "Don't try to be brave," said Shiva. "If the Gunas have been arrested already, leave Meluha quickly and wait for me at Kashi." Veerbhadra's mother was with the Gunas. Shiva knew Veerbhadra would not abandon her to her fate so easily. "Shiva," whispered Veerbhadra. Shiva got up and held Veerbhadra's shoulders. "Bhadra, promise me." Veerbhadra remained quiet. "If you try to release them by yourself, you'll be killed. You will be of no use to your mother if you are dead, Bhadra." Veerbhadra stayed silent. "I promise you, nothing will happen to the Gunas. If you cannot get them out, I will. But do not do anything rash. Promise me." Veerbhadra placed his hand on Shiva's shoulder. "There is something you aren't telling me. What have you discovered here? Why are you so afraid suddenly? Is there going to be a war? Is Meluha going to become our enemy?" I'm not sure, Bhadra. I haven't made up my mind as yet.
Then tell me what you do know.
It was Shiva's turn to remain silent now.
I'm going back to Meluha, Shiva. Had you asked me a month back, I would have said this would be the safest journey possible. A lot has changed since then. You have to tell me the truth. I deserve that.
Shiva sat them down and revealed everything he had discovered during the course of the last few days.
And you killed a rhino all by yourself?
Asked an impressed Anandamai. Her face fused with a broad smile. Yes, Your Highness, said Karthik, stoic and expressionless as usual. Anandamai, Ayurvati and Karthik were settled comfortably on soft cushions in the dining room. Kshatriya in word and deed, Anandamai and Karthik partook of the delicious rhinoceros meat. The Brahmin Ayurvati restricted herself to roti, dal and vegetables.
Have you decided to stop smiling altogether?
Asked Anandamai.
Or is this just temporary?
Karthik looked up at Anandamai, a hint of a smile on his face. Smiling takes more effort than it's worth, Your Highness. Ayurvati shook her head.
You're just a child, Karthik. Don't trouble yourself so much. You need to enjoy your childhood.
Karthik turned to the Meluhan chief physician.
My brother Ganesh is a great man, Ayurvati-ji. He has so much to contribute to society, to the country. And yet, he was almost eaten alive by dumb beasts because he was trying to save me.
Ayurvati reached across and patted Karthik.
I will never be so helpless again, swore Karthik. I will not be the cause of my family's misery.
The door swung open. Parvateshwar and Bhagirath walked in. Just by looking at them, Anandamai could tell that they had discovered what she feared.
Was it Meluha?
Ayurvati winced. She could not imagine her great country's name being dragged into a vile conspiracy like the attack on the Nilkant's convoy at the outskirts of Panchavati. And yet, after what she had discovered of Emperor Daksha's perfidy during Sati's pregnancy at Maika, she would not be surprised if Meluhan ships had carried out this dastardly act.
It's worse,
sighed Bhagirath as he sat down. Parvateshwar sat next to Anandamai and held her hand. He looked at Ayurvati, his pained expression bearing witness to his stark misery. The general prized his country, his Meluha, as Lord Ram's ultimate legacy. It was the custodian of Ram Rajya. How could this great country's emperor have committed such a dastardly act such as this?
Even worse?
Prompted Anandamai.
Yes, it seems Swadeep is in on the conspiracy as well.
Anandamai was stunned.
What? It's either only Ayodhya or all of Swadeep. I cannot be sure if other kingdoms of Swadeep are following Ayodhya's lead. But Ayodhya is certainly involved.
Anandamai looked at Parvateshwar. He nodded, confirming Bhagirath's words.
Lord Rudra be merciful, said Anandamai. What is wrong with father?
I for one am not surprised, said Bhagirath, barely able to conceal his contempt. He's weak and gets easily exploited. It doesn't take much for him to succumb. For once, Anandamai didn't rebuke her brother for denigrating their father. She looked at Parvateshwar. He seemed lost and unsure. Change was horrible for the Suryavanshis, for the people of the masculine, used as they were to unchanging rules and stark predictability. Anandamai turned her husband's face towards herself and kissed him gently, reassuringly. She smiled warmly. He half smiled back. Karthik quietly put his plate down, washed his hands, and walked out of the room. It was early afternoon as Karthik and Ganesh's steps led them around the 5 banyan trees from whose existence Panchavati derived its name. Non-Nagas were not allowed inside the inner city. In truth, many of them, Brangas included, refused to enter due to a strong superstition about the misfortune that would befall those who did. But the Nilkant's family did not believe in it. And anyway, nobody wanted to enforce an entry ban on them.
Why have only Lord Ram's idols been depicted on these trees, Dada?
Karthik asked his elder brother. You mean why have his wife Lady Sita and his brother Lord Lakshman not been shown?
Not just them. Even his greatest devotee, Lord Hanuman, is missing.
Ganesh and Karthik were admiring the beautiful idols of Lord Ram sculpted into the main trunk of each of the 5 banyans. The 5 tree idols showed the ancient king, respected as the 7th Vishnu, in the 5 different roles of his life known to all: a son, a husband, a brother, a father, and a godly king. Each banyan trunk depicted him in a different form. In each form, in a manner that somehow appeared natural, the sculptors had made the idols look towards the temple of Lord Rudra and Lady Mohini at one corner of the square. Their idols, on the other hand, were placed in the front section of the temple as opposed to the back as in most temples, with the effect that the two deities appeared to be looking at all 5 tree idols as well. It seemed as if the architects intended to show the great Mahadev and the noble 7th Vishnu being respectful to each other. "It is in keeping with Bhumi Devi's instructions," answered Ganesh. "I know his traditional depiction in the Sapt Sindhu is always along with his 3 favorite people in the world, Lady Sita, Lord Lakshman and Lord Hanuman. But it was an order of Bhumi Devi, our founding goddess, that Lord Ram always be shown alone in Panchavati, especially at the 5 banyans." "Why?" "I don't know. Perhaps you wanted us to always remember that great leaders like the Vishnus and the Mahadevs may have millions following them, but at the end of the day, they carry the burden of their mission alone." "Like Baba?" asked Karthik, referring to their father. "Yes, like Baba. He is the one who stands between evil and India. If he fails, life in the subcontinent will be destroyed by evil." "Baba will not fail?" Ganesh smiled at Karthik's response. "Do you know why?" asked Karthik. Ganesh shook his head. "No, why?" Karthik clasped Ganesh's right hand and held it to his chest, like the brother warriors of yore. "Because he is not alone." Ganesh smiled and embraced Karthik. They walked silently around the banyan trees, doing the holy parikrama of Lord Ram's idols. "What is going on, Dada?" asked Karthik as they continued their circumambulation. Ganesh frowned. "Why have both the emperors allied against Baba?" Ganesh breathed deeply. He never lied to Karthik. He considered his brother an adult and treated him as such. "Because Baba threatens them, Karthik. They are the elite. They are addicted to the benefits they derive from evil. Baba's mission is to fight for the oppressed, to be the voice of the voiceless. It is obvious that the elite will want to stop him." "What is the evil that Baba is fighting? How has it entrenched its claws so deeply?" Ganesh took Karthik by the hand and made him sit at the foot of one of the banyans. "This is for you alone, Karthik. You are not to tell anyone else, for it is Baba's right to decide when and how others are to be informed." Karthik nodded in response. Ganesh sat next to Karthik and explained to him about what Brahaspati and Shiva had discussed the previous day.
"What have you been doing these past 5 years, Brahaspati?" asked Shiva.
Sati and Shiva had joined the chief scientist to the Naga Queen's chambers. Brahaspati felt like he was being interrogated, but he could understand Shiva's need to get to the bottom of the issue. "I was trying to find a permanent solution to the Somras problem," answered Brahaspati.
"Permanent solution?"
"Destroying Mount Mandar is a temporary solution. We know it will get rebuilt. The Nagas tell me the reconstruction has been surprisingly slow. It shouldn't have taken 5 years, not with Meluhan efficiency. But it's only a matter of time before it gets rebuilt." Shiva looked at Sati, but she didn't say anything. "Once Mandar is back to full manufacturing capacity, the destruction of the Saraswati and the production of the toxic waste will begin in large measure once again. So we have to find a permanent solution. The best way to do that is to examine the Somras's ingredients. If we can somehow control that, we could possibly control the poisonous impact of the Somras waste. Many ingredients can be easily replaced, but 2 of them cannot. The first are the bark and branches of the Sanjeevani tree, and the second is the Saraswati water. We cannot control the availability of the Sanjeevani tree. Meluha has large plantations of it across its northern reaches. How many plantations can one destroy? Besides, trees can always be replanted. That brings us to the Saraswati. Can we somehow control its waters?" Shiva remembered parts of a conversation with Daksha when he had first arrived in Devagiri.
"I was told by Emperor Daksha that the Chandravanshis did try to destroy the Saraswati more than 100 years ago. By taking one of its main tributaries, the Yamuna, away from it and redirecting its flow towards the Ganga. It didn't really make much sense to me, but the Meluhans seemed to believe it."
Brahaspati sniggered. "The Chandravanshi ruling class cannot even build roads in their own empire. How can anyone think that they would have the ability to change the course of a river?" What happened 100 years ago was an earthquake that changed the course of the Yamuna. The Meluhans subsequently defeated the Chandravanshis, and the resultant treaty mandated that the early course of the Yamuna would become no man's land. And Meluhans do have the technology to change the course of rivers. They built giant embankments to block and change the course of the Yamuna to make it flow back into the Saraswati. So what was your plan? Destroy the Yamuna embankments? No, I had considered it, but that is impossible as well. They have many fail-safe options. It would take 5 brigades and months of open work to be able to destroy those embankments. We would obviously have had to work in secret with a small number of people. So, what was your plan? An alternative. We cannot take the Saraswati away, but could we make the Saraswati much less potent in the production of the Somras? Is it possible to add something to the Yamuna waters at its source, which would then flow into the Saraswati and control the amount of waste being produced? I thought that we had found one such ingredient. What? A bacterium which reacts with the Sanjeevani tree and makes it decay almost instantly. I thought the Sanjeevani tree was already unstable and decayed rapidly. Ayurveda had told me that the Naga medicine is created by mixing the crushed branches of another tree with the Sanjeevani bark to stabilize it. If the Sanjeevani is already unstable, why would it need bacteria to aid the decay? Wouldn't it just decay anyway? The Sanjeevani bark becomes unstable once stripped off the branch. The entire branch, if used, is not. The bark is easier for small-scale manufacture, but for manufacturing the Somras in large quantities, we have to use crushed branches. This is what we did at Mount Mandar, but it is a method known only to my scientists. So what you want to do is make the Sanjeevani branch also unstable? Yes, and I discovered that it was possible to do so with this bacterium, but it is only available in Mesopotamia. Is this what you picked up from Karachapa when you accompanied me on my initial travels through Meluha? You had said you were expecting a shipment from Mesopotamia. Yes, said Brahaspati, and it would have worked perfectly. The Somras cannot be made without both the Sanjeevani tree and the Saraswati water. The presence of bacteria in the Saraswati water would render useless the Sanjeevani tree at the beginning of the process itself. And in any case, without the Saraswati water, the Somras cannot be made. Without the power of the Sanjeevani, the Somras would not be as potent. It will not triple or quadruple one's lifespan, but only increase it by 20 or 30 years. However, it would also mean that there would be practically no production of Somras waste. By sacrificing some of the powers of the Somras, we would take away all the poison of the Somras waste. Furthermore, these bacteria also mix with water and then multiply prodigiously. All we needed to do was release it in the Yamuna and the rest would follow. Sounds perfect. Why didn't you? There's no free lunch, said Brahaspati. The bacteria came with its own problems. It is a mild toxin in itself. If we mix it in large quantities, as would be required in the Saraswati, we could create a new set of diseases for all living beings, dependent not just on the Saraswati, but also the Yamuna. We would have only replaced one problem with another. So, you were trying to see if the poisonous effect of the bacteria could be reduced or removed without disturbing its ability to destroy the Sanjeevani tree? Yes, secrecy was required. If those who support the Somras knew about these bacteria, they would try to kill it at its source. Had they known I was working on an experiment such as this, they would have had me assassinated. Aren't you afraid of being killed now? Asked Shiva. A lot of Meluhans will be angry with you when they discover you weren't the victim, but the perpetrator of the attack on Mount Mandar. Brahaspati breathed deeply. Earlier, it was important for me to remain alive since I alone could have done this research. But I have failed, and the solution to the Somras problem is not in my hands anymore. It's in your hands. It doesn't matter if I live any longer. Mount Mandar will be reconstructed. It's a matter of time, and Somras production will begin once again. You have to stop it, Shiva. For the sake of India, you have to stop the Somras. The reconstruction is a charade, Brahaspati-ji, said Sati. It's to mislead enemies into thinking that it will take time to get Somras production back on track. To make them think that Meluha must be surviving on lower quantities of Somras. What? Is there another facility? Asked Brahaspati as he looked quickly at Kali. But that cannot be true. It is, answered Sati. I was told by father himself. Apparently, It was built years ago as a backup to Mount Mandar, just in case." "Where?" asked Kali. "I don't know," replied Sati. "Damn!" exclaimed Kali, scowling darkly as she turned to Brahaspati. "You had said that this was not possible. The churners needed materials from Egypt. They could not be built from Indian material. We have allies constantly watching those Egyptian mines. No material has gone to Meluha." Brahaspati's face turned white as the implications dawned on him. He held his head and muttered, "Would Ram be merciful? How can they resort to this?" "Resort to what?" asked Shiva. "There's another way in which the Saraswati waters can be mixed with the crushed Sanjeevani branches, but it's considered wasteful and repugnant." "Why?" "Firstly, it uses much larger quantities of the Saraswati water. Secondly, it needs animal or human skin cells." "Excuse me?" cried Shiva and Sati. "It doesn't mean that one skins a live animal or human," said Brahaspati, as though reassuring them. "What is needed is old and dead skin cells that we shed every minute that we're alive. The cells help the Saraswati waters to grate the Sanjeevani branches at molecular levels. The waters mixed with dead skin cells are simply poured over crushed branches placed in a chamber. This process does not require any churning, but, as you can imagine, it wastes a lot of water. Secondly, how would one find animals and humans who would come to a faraway facility and get into a pool of water above a chamber which contains crushed Sanjeevani branches? It is risky." "Why?" "Dead skin cells of humans or animals are best shed while bathing. A human sheds between 2 and 3 kilograms every year. Bathing hastens the process." "But why is this risky?" "Because Somras production is inherently unstable. The skin cell route even more so. One doesn't want large populations anywhere close to a Somras facility. If anything goes wrong, the resultant explosion can kill hundreds of thousands, even in the usual, less risky churning process. We do not build Somras production centers close to cities. Can you imagine what would happen if the riskier skin cell process was being conducted close to a city with a large number of humans ritually bathing above a Somras production center?" Shiva's face suddenly turned white. "Public baths in Maluhan cities," he whispered. "Exactly," said Brahaspati. "Build a facility within a city below a public bath. One would have all the dead skin cells that one would need." "And if something goes wrong, if an explosion takes place?" "Blame the Devi Astras or the Nagas, blame the Chandravanshis if you want," fumed Brahaspati. "Having created so many evil specters, you can take your pick." "Something is wrong," said Bhrigu. He was surveying the destroyed remains of Mount Mandar with Dilipa. The Somras manufacturing facility looked nowhere near completion, though reconstruction was on. Dilipa turned towards the sage. "I agree, Maharishiji. It has been more than 5 years since the Nagas destroyed Mandar. It's ridiculous that the facility has still not been reconstructed." Bhrigu turned to Dilipa and waved his hand dismissively. "Mount Mandar is not important anymore. It is only a symbol. I'm talking about the attack on Panchavati." Dilipa stared wide-eyed at the sage. "Mount Mandar is not important? This means that the rumors are true. Another Somras manufacturing facility does exist." "I had given a whole kit of homing pigeons to the attackers," continued Bhrigu, not bothering with Dilipa's incredulous look. "All of them had been trained to return to this site. The last pigeon came in 2 weeks back." Dilipa frowned. "You can trust my man, my lord. He will not fail." Bhrigu had appointed an officer from Dilipa's army to lead the attack on Shiva's convoy at Panchavati. He did not trust Daksha's ability to detach himself from his love for his daughter. "Of that I am sure. He has proven himself trustworthy, strictly complying with my instructions to send back a message every week. The fact that the updates have suddenly stopped means that he has either been captured or killed. I'm sure a message is on its way. We needn't worry." Bhrigu turned sharply towards Dilipa. "Is this how you govern your empire, great king? Is it any wonder that your son's claim to the throne appears legitimate?" Dilipa's silence was telling. Bhrigu sighed. "When you prepare for war, you should always hope for the best, but be ready for the worst. The last dispatch clearly stated that they were but 6 days' sail from Panchavati. Having received no word, I am compelled to assume the worst. The attack must have failed. Also, I should assume Shiva knows the identity of the attackers. Dilipa didn't speak, but kept staring at Brigu. He thought Brigu was overreacting. I am not overreacting, Your Highness, said Brigu. Dilipa was stunned. He hadn't uttered a word. Do not underestimate the issue, said Brigu. This is not about you or me. This is about the future of India. This is about protecting the greatest good. We cannot afford to fail. It is our duty to Lord Brahma, our duty to this great land of ours. Dilipa remained silent. The one thought kept reverberating in his mind. I'm way out of my depth here. I have entangled myself with powers that are beyond mere emperors. Chapter 4. A Frog Homily. The aroma of freshly cooked food emerged from Shiva's chambers as his family assembled for their evening meal. Sati's culinary skill and effort were evident in the feast she had lined up for what was practically their first meal together as a family. Shiva, Ganesh, and Karthik waited for her to take a seat before they began the meal. In keeping with custom, the family of the Mahadev took some water from their glasses and sprinkled it around their plates, symbolically thanking Goddess Annapurna for her blessings in the form of food and nourishment. After this, they offered the first morsel of food to the gods. Breaking with age-old tradition though, Shiva always offered his first morsel to his wife. For him, she was divine. Sati reciprocated by offering her first morsel to Shiva. Thus, the meal began. Ganesh has got some mangoes for you today, said Sati, looking indulgently at Karthik. Karthik grinned. Yummy! Thanks, Dada! Ganesh smiled and patted Karthik on his back. You should smile a little more, Karthik, said Shiva. Life is not so grim. Karthik smiled at his father. I'll try, Baba. Looking at his other progeny, Shiva inhaled sharply. Ganesh? Yes, Baba, said Ganesh, unsure of the response to his calling Shiva father. My son, whispered Shiva, I misjudged you. Ganesh's eyes moistened. Forgive me, said Shiva. No, Baba, exclaimed Ganesh, embarrassed. How can you ask me for forgiveness? You are my father. Brahaspati had told Shiva that he had made Ganesh take an oath of secrecy. Nobody was to know that the former Meluhan chief scientist was alive. Brahaspati did not trust anyone and wanted his experiments on the Mesopotamian bacteria to remain secret. Ganesh had kept his word even at the cost of almost losing his beloved mother and of grievously damaging his relationship with Shiva. You're a man of your word, said Shiva. You honored your promise to Brahaspati without sparing a thought for the price you would be paying. Ganesh remained silent. I'm proud of you, my son, said Shiva. Ganesh smiled. Sati looked at Shiva, Karthik, and then at Ganesh. Her world had come full circle. Life was as perfect as it could possibly be. She did not need anything else. She could live her life in Panchavati till the end of her days. But she knew that this was not to be. A war was coming, a battle that would require major sacrifices. She knew she had to savor these moments for as long as they lasted. What now, Baba? Asked Karthik seriously. We're going to eat, laughed Shiva, and then, hopefully, we will go to sleep. No, smiled Karthik. You know what I mean. Are we going to proclaim the Somras as the ultimate evil? Are we going to declare war against all those who continue to use or protect the Somras? Shiva looked at Karthik thoughtfully. There has already been a lot of fighting, Karthik. We will not rush into anything. Shiva turned to Ganesh. I'm sorry, my son, but I need to know more. I have to know more. I understand, Baba. There are only two groups of people who know all there is to know about this. The Vasudevs and the Vayuputras. Yes. I'm not sure if the Vayuputra Council will help me, but I know the Vasudevs will. I'll take you to Ujjain, Baba. You can speak to their chief directly. Where is Ujjain? It's up north, beyond the Narmada. Shiva considered it for a bit. That would be along the shorter route to Swadweep and Meluha, right? With the security of the Panchavati uppermost in her mind, Kali had led Shiva and his entourage from Kashi to Panchavati via an elaborate route which took a year to traverse. The party had first headed east through Swadweep, then south from Branga. They then moved west from Kalinga through the dangerous Dandak forests before they reached the headwaters of the Godavari where Panchavati lay. Shiva realized that there must be a shorter northern route to Meluha and Swadweep, which was impossible to traverse without a Naga guide because of the impregnable forests that impeded the path. Yes, Baba, though Mosi is very secretive about this route, I know that she would be happy to share it with the three of you. I understand, said Sati. The Nagas have many powerful enemies. Yes, Ma, said Ganesh before turning to Shiva. But that is not the only reason. Let's be honest. Though the war has not yet begun, we already know that the most powerful emperors in the land are against us. Which side everyone takes, including those waiting in the Panchavati guest house colony, will become clear over the next few months. Panchavati is a safe haven. It's not wise to give away its secrets just as yet. Shiva nodded. Let me figure out what I should do with my convoy. There aren't too many kings in the Sapt Sindhu I can readily trust at this point of time. Once I've made up my mind, we can make plans to leave for Ujjain. Karthik turned to Ganesh. Dada, there's one thing I simply don't understand. The Vayuputras are the tribe left behind by Lord Rudra. They helped the great seventh Vishnu, Lord Ram, complete his mission. So how is it that these good people do not see the evil that the Somras has become today? Ganesh smiled. I have a theory. Shiva and Sati looked up at Ganesh while continuing to eat. You've seen a frog, right? Asked Ganesh. Yes, said Karthik. Interesting creatures, especially their tongues. Ganesh smiled. Apparently, an unknown Brahmin scientist had conducted some experiments on frogs a long time ago. He dropped a frog into a pot of boiling water. The frog immediately jumped out. He then placed a frog in a pot full of cold water. The frog settled down comfortably. The Brahmin then began raising the temperature of the water gradually over many hours. The frog kept adapting to the increasingly warm and then hot water till it finally died without making any attempt to escape. Shiva, Sati and Karthik listened in rapt attention. Naga students learn this story as a life lesson, said Ganesh. Often, our immediate reaction to a sudden crisis helps us save ourselves. Our response to gradual crisis that creeps up on us, on the other hand, may be so adaptive as to ultimately lead to self-destruction. Are you suggesting that the Vayuputras keep adapting to the incremental ill effects of the Somras? Asked Karthik. That the bad news is not emerging rapidly enough? Perhaps, said Ganesh, for I refuse to believe that the Vayuputras, the people of Lord Rudra, would consciously choose to let evil live. The only explanation is that they genuinely believe the Somras is not evil. Interesting, said Shiva. And perhaps you are right too. Sati chipped in with a smile, almost as if to lighten the atmosphere. But do you really believe in the frog experiment? Ganesh smiled. It is such a popular story around here that I'd actually tried it when I was a child. Did you really boil a frog slowly to death? And it sat still all the while? Ganesh laughed. Ma, frogs don't sit still no matter what you do. Boiling water, cold water or lukewarm water, a frog always leaps out. The family of the Mahadev laughed heartily. Shiva and Sati were exiting the Panchavati Rajya Sabha, having just met with the Naga nobility. Many of the nobles were in agreement with Queen Kali, who wanted to attack Meluha right away and destroy the evil Somras. But some, like Vasuki and Astik, wanted to avoid war. Vasuki and Astik genuinely want peace, but for the wrong reasons, said Shiva, shaking his head. They may be Naga nobility, but they believe that their own people deserve their cruel fate because they are being punished for their past life sins. This is nonsense. Sati, who believed in the concept of karma extending over many births, could not hold back her objection. Just because we don't understand something doesn't necessarily mean it's rubbish, Shiva.
Come on, Sati. There is only this life, this moment. That is the only thing we can be sure of. Everything else is only theory.
Then why were the Nagas born deformed? Why did I live as a Vikarma for so long? Surely it must be because in some sense we deserved it. We were paying for our past life sins.
That's ridiculous. How can anyone be sure about past life sins? The Vikarma system, like every system that governs human lives, was created by us. You fought the Vikarma system and freed yourself.
But I didn't free myself, Shiva. You did. It was your strength, and all the Vikarmas, including me, was set free because that was your karma.
So how does this work? Asked Shiva disbelievingly. That the compounded totality of sins committed by all the Vikarma over their individual previous lives was nullified at the stroke of a quill when I struck down this law? On that fateful day, in a flash, several lifetimes of sins, sullying every Vikarma soul, were washed away? A day of divine pardon indeed.
Shiva, are you mocking me?
Did I ever do that, dear? Asked Shiva, but his smile gave him away. Don't you see how illogical this entire concept is? How can one believe that an innocent child is born with sin? It's clear as daylight. A newborn child has done no wrong. He has done no right either. He's just been born. He could not have done anything.
Perhaps not in this life, Shiva, but it's possible that the child committed a sin in a previous life. Perhaps the child's ancestors committed sins for which the child must be held accountable.
Shiva was unconvinced. Don't you get it? It's a system designed to control people. It makes those who suffer or are oppressed blame themselves for their misery. Because you believe you are paying for sins committed either in your own previous lives or those committed by your ancestors or even community. Perhaps even the sins of the first man ever born. The system therefore propagates suffering as a form of atonement and at the same time does not allow one to question the wrongs done unto oneself.
Then why do some people suffer? Why do some get far less than what they deserve?
The same reason why there are others who get far more than what they deserve. It's completely random.
Shiva gallantly reached out to help Sati mount her steed, but she declined and gracefully slid onto the stallion. Her husband smiled. There was nothing he loved more than her intense sense of self-sufficiency and pride. Shiva leapt onto his own horse and with a quick spur matched Sati's pace. Really, Shiva, said Sati, looking towards him, do you believe that the Paramatma plays dice with the universe? That we're all handed our fate randomly? The Nagas on the road recognized Shiva and bowed low in respect. They didn't believe in the legend of the Nilkant, but clearly their queen respected the Mahadev, and that made most Nagas believe in Shiva as well. He politely acknowledged every person, even as he replied to Sati without turning.
I think the Paramatma does not interfere in our lives. He sets the rules by which the universe exists. Then he does something very difficult.
What?
He leaves us alone. He lets things play out naturally. He lets his creations make decisions about their own lives. It's not easy being a witness when one has the power to rule. It takes a supreme God to be able to do that. He knows this is our world, our Karma Bhumi, said Shiva, waving his hand all around as though pointing out the land of their karma.
Don't you think this is difficult to accept? If people believe that their fate is completely random, it would leave them without any sense of understanding, purpose or motivation, or why they are where they are.
On the contrary, this is an empowering thought. When you know that your fate is completely random, you have the freedom to commit yourself to any theory that will empower you. If you have been blessed with good fate, you can choose to believe it is God's kindness and ingrain humility within. But if you have been cursed with bad fate, you need to know that no great power is seeking to punish you. Your situation is, in fact, a result of completely random circumstances, an indiscriminate turn of the universe. Therefore, if you decide to challenge your destiny,
Your opponent would not be some judgmental Lord Almighty who is seeking to punish you. Your opponent would only be the limitations of your own mind. This will empower you to fight your fate.
Sati shook her head. Sometimes you are too revolutionary.
Shiva's eyes crinkled. Maybe that is itself a result of my past life sins.
Laughing together, they cantered out of the city gates. Seeing the Panchavati guest colony in the distance, Shiva whispered gravely,
But one man will have to account to his friends for his karma in this life.
Brahaspatiji?
Shiva nodded.
What do you have in mind?
I'd asked Brahaspati if he'd like to meet Parvateshwar and Ayurvati to explain to them as to how he is still alive. And he readily agreed.
I would have expected nothing less from him. Are you all right? Asked Anandamai. Parvateshwar and Anandamai were in their private room in the Panchavati guest house colony.
I'm thoroughly confused, said Parvateshwar. The ruler of Meluha should represent the best there is in our way of life, truth, duty, and honor. What does it say about us if our emperor is such a habitual lawbreaker? He broke the law when Sati's child was born.
I know what Emperor Daksh did was patently wrong, but one could argue that he's just a father trying to protect his child, albeit in his own stupid manner.
The fact that he did what was wrong is enough, Anandamai. He broke the law. And now he has broken one of Lord Rudra's laws by using the Devi Astras. How can Meluha, the finest land in the world, have an emperor like him? Isn't something wrong somewhere?
Anandamai held her husband's hand. Your emperor was never any good. I could have told you that many years ago. But you don't need to blame all of Meluha for his misdeeds.
That's not the way it works. A leader is not just a person who gives orders. He is also the one who symbolizes the society he leads. If the leader is corrupt, then the society must be corrupt too.
Who feeds this nonsense to you, my love? A leader is just a human being like anyone else. He doesn't symbolize anything.
Parvateshwar shook his head. There are some truths that cannot be challenged. A leader's karma impacts his entire land. He is supposed to be his people's icon. That is a universal truth.
Anandamai bent towards him with a soft twinkle in her eyes. Parvateshwar, there is your truth and there is my truth. As for universal truth, it does not exist.
Parvateshwar smiled as he brushed a stray strand of hair away from her face. You Chandravanshis are very good with words.
Words can only be as good or as bad as the thoughts they convey.
Parvateshwar's smile spread wider. So what is your thought on what I should do? My emperor's actions have put me in a situation where my god, the Nilkant, may declare war on my country. What do I do then? How do I know which side to pick?
You should stick to your god, said Anandamai without any hint of hesitation in her voice. But this is a hypothetical question, so don't worry too much about it. My lord, you called, said Ayurvati. She had been as surprised as Parvateshwar when the both of them had been summoned to Shiva's chambers. Since their arrival in Panchavati, Shiva had spent most of his time with the Nagas. Ayurvati was convinced that the Nagas were somehow complicit in the attack on Shiva's convoy. She also believed the Nilkant was perhaps investigating the roots of Naga treachery in Panchavati.
Parvateshwar, Ayurvati, welcome, said Shiva. I called you here because it is time now for you to know the secret of the Nagas. Parvateshwar looked up, surprised. But why only the two of us, my lord? Because the both of you are Meluhans. I have reason to suspect that the attack on us at the Godavari is linked to many things. The plague in Branga, the plight of the Nagas, and the drying up of the Saraswati.
Parvateshwar and Ayurvati were flummoxed.
But I am certain about one thing, said Shiva. The attack is connected to the destruction of Mount Mandar.
What?
How? Only one man can explain it. One whom you believe is dead.
Ayurvati and Parvateshwar spun around as they heard the door open. Brahaspati walked in quietly.
The Somras is evil? Asked Anandamai incredulously. Is that what the Lord Nilkant thinks? Parvateshwar and Anandamai were in their chambers at the Panchvati guest colony. Bhagirath had just joined them. I'm not sure about what he thinks, said Parvateshwar, but Brahaspati seems to think so. But evil is supposed to be evil for everybody, said Bhagirath. Why should a Surya Vanshi turncoat decide what evil is? Why should we listen to him? Why should the Nilkant listen to him? Bhagirath, do you expect me to defend Brahaspati, the man who destroyed the soul of our empire? Asked Parvateshwar. Just a minute, said Anandamai, raising her hand. Think this through. If the plague in Branga is linked to the Somras, if the slow depletion of the river Saraswati is linked to the Somras, if the birth of the Nagas is linked to the Somras, then isn't it fair to think that maybe it is evil? So what is the Nilkant planning to do? Does he want to ban the Somras? Asked Bhagirath. I don't know, Bhagirath, snapped an irritated Parvateshwar, his world having turned upside down because of Daksha and now Brahaspati. You keep asking me questions, the answers to which I don't know. Anandamai placed a hand on Parvateshwar's shoulders. Perhaps the Nilkant is just as shocked as we are. He needs to think things over. He cannot afford to make hasty decisions. Well, he's made one already, said Parvateshwar. Bhagirath and Anandamai looked at Parvateshwar curiously. We are to leave for Swadweep once all have recovered from their injuries. The Lord has asked us to wait for him at Kashi till he decides his next move. He believes King Adithigva has not sold out to Ayodhya in the conspiracy to assassinate us on the Godavari. But if we go to Kashi, my father will get to know that we are alive, said Bhagirath. He will know his attack has failed. We have to keep quiet about it. We have to pretend that nothing happened, that we were not attacked at all, that we made an uneventful journey to Panchavati and back. Won't they wonder about their ships? The Lord says that's all right. Many things can happen during long sea and river voyages. They may believe their ships met with an accident before they could attack us. Bhagirath raised his eyebrows. My father may be stupid enough to believe that story, but he is not the leader. Whoever put together a conspiracy of this scale will certainly investigate what went wrong. But investigations take time, allowing the Nilkant to check whatever else it is that he needs to. The Lord is not coming with us? Asked a surprised Anandamai. Parvateshwar shook his head. No. And the Lord has said we should let it be known that neither his family nor he is with us at Kashi. It should be publicized that he remains in Panchavati. The Lord believes that it will keep us safe as the attack was aimed at him. That can mean only one thing, said Bhagirath. He chooses to take Brahaspati at face value, but wants to ascertain a few more things before he makes up his mind. Anandamai looked at her husband with concern in her eyes. She knew that a war was approaching, perhaps the biggest war that India had ever seen. And in all probability, Meluha and Shiva would be on opposite sides. Which side would her husband choose? Whatever happens, said Anandamai, holding Parvateshwar's face, we must have faith in the Nilkant. Parvateshwar nodded silently. Shiva, Parshuram and Nandi were sitting on the banks of the Godavari. Shiva took a deep drag from the chillum as he looked towards the river, lost in thought. He let out a sigh as he turned to his friends. Are you sure, Parshuram? Yes, my lord, replied Parshuram. I can even take you to the uppermost point of the mighty Brahmaputra, where it is the Sangpo. But I wouldn't recommend it, for fatalities can be high on that treacherous route. Shiva's silence provoked Parshuram to probe further. What is it about that river, my lord? He had been intrigued by the abnormal interest shown by the Nagas in the Brahmaputra's course as well. First the Nagas, now you. Why is everyone so interested in it? It may be the carrier of evil, Parshuram. Nandi looked up in surprise. Doesn't the Sangpo begin close to your own home in Tibet, my lord? Yes, Nandi, said Shiva. It seems evil has been closer than it initially appeared. Nandi remained quiet. He was one of the few who knew the ships that attacked Shiva's convoy were from Meluha. He knew what he had to do. If it came to a choice between Shiva and his country, he would choose Shiva. But it still hurt him immensely. He knew he might have to be part of an army that would attack his beloved motherland, Meluha. He hated his fate for having put him in such a situation. "I think I know how to find the mastermind, my lord," said Bhagirath. He had sought an appointment with Shiva as soon as he had stepped out of Parvateshwar's chambers. He knew that his father had decided to oppose the Nilkant. It made sense, therefore, for Bhagirath to immediately prove his loyalty to Shiva. He didn't expect Shiva to lose. Regardless of the opinion of the kings, the people would be with the Nilkant. "How?" asked Shiva. "You'd agree that my father hardly has the wherewithal to draw up such an elaborate plan. I'd say his selfish needs have made him succumb to the evil designs of another." Shiva edged forward, intrigued. "You think he has been bribed? Your father is in no need of money." "What can be a better bribe than life itself, my lord? Had you seen my father a few years back, you would have thought he was but a small step away from the cremation pyre. A life of debauchery and drink had wreaked havoc within his body. But today, he looks younger than I've ever known." "The Somras?" "I don't think so. I know he tried the Somras in the past. It hadn't worked. Somebody is supplying him with superior medicines, something that is otherwise unavailable to even a king." Shiva's eyes widened. Who could be more powerful, more knowledgeable than a king? "Do you think a Maharishi is helping him?" Bhagirath shook his head. "No, my lord. I think a Maharishi is leading him." "But who can that Maharishi be?" "I don't know. But when I go back to Ayodhya..." "Ayodhya? If we are to maintain that no ships attacked us on the Godavari, my lord, then what reason can there be for my not going back to Ayodhya? It will arouse suspicion. More importantly, I can only uncover the true identity of the master when I'm in Ayodhya. Despite my father's best efforts, I still have eyes and ears in the impregnable city." Shiva considered this for a moment. He agreed with the train of thought. Moreover, now that Dilipa had chosen to align himself against Shiva, Bhagirath would be even more eager to prove his loyalty to him. Shiva nodded. "All right, go to Ayodhya." "But my lord, when the time comes, I hope Ayodhya and Swadweep will be shown some kindness." "Kindness?" "We have not used the Somras excessively, my lord. Only a few Chandravanshi nobles use it, and that too sparingly. It is the Meluhans who've abused its usage. That is what has made evil rise. Therefore, it is only fair that when the Somras is banned, this ban be imposed only on Meluha. Swadweep has not benefited from the drink of the gods. I hope we will be allowed to use it." "You didn't choose to use less Somras, Bhagirath," said Shiva. "You just didn't have the opportunity to do so. If you had, the situation would have been very different. You know that just as much as I do." "But Meluha..." "Yes, Meluha has used more, so naturally they will suffer more. But let me make one thing clear. If I decide the Somras is evil, then no one will use it. No one." Bhagirath kept silent. "Is that clear?" asked Shiva. "Of course, my lord." Chapter 5. The Shorter Route. A caravan of 500 people was moving up the northern path from Panchavati towards the Vasudev city of Ujjain. Shiva and his family were in the center, surrounded by half a brigade of joint Naga and Branga soldiers in standard defensive formations. Kali did not want to reveal this route to anyone from Shiva's original convoy, so none of them were included. Nandi and Parashuram were the only exceptions. Brahaspati had been included for Shiva might need his advice in understanding what the Vasudevs had to say about the Somras. Whereas Shiva persisted in his quest and questions with Brahaspati, the old brotherly love that they had shared was missing. Parvateshwar, Ayurvati, Anandamai and Bhagirath, along with the original convoy, had stayed back at Panchavati. They were going to leave for Kashi in a few weeks. their eastern route going through the Dandak forest onwards through Branga. Vishwadyumna was to accompany them as a guide up to Branga. "Ganesh, does Ujjain fall on the way from Panchvati to Meluha, or do we take a detour?" asked Shiva, goading his horse forward over the path built through the forest. It was fenced by 2 protective hedges. The inner layer comprised the harmless Nagavalli creepers, while the outer one had poisonous vines to prevent wild animals from entering. "Actually, Baba, Ujjain is on the way to Swadweep. It's to the northeast. Meluha lies to the northwest." Sati tried to get her bearings of Meluha and Maika at the dried mouth of the Saraswati. The Meluhan city of birds was not too far from the mouth of the Narmada. "Does the Narmada serve as your waterway? One can sail west for Meluha and east for Ujjain and Swadweep." "Yes, Ma," answered Ganesh. Shiva turned to his son. "Have you ever been to Maika? How do abandoned Naga children get adopted?" "Maika is the one place where there is no bias against the Nagas, Baba. Perhaps the sight of helpless Naga babies shrieking in pain as a cancerous growth bursts through their bodies melts the hearts of the authorities. The Maika governor takes personal interest in attempting to save as many Naga babies as he can in the crucial first month after their birth. A Naga ship sails down the Narmada every month, docks at Maika late at night, and the babies born in that month are handed over to us by the Maika record keeper. Some non-Naga parents choose to stay back and move to Panchavati for the sake of their children." "Don't the Maika authorities stop them?" "Actually, the tenets of Meluhan law require parents to accompany their Naga children to Panchavati. In doing so, they are following their law. But others refuse to do so. They abandon their children and return to their comfortable life in Meluha. In such cases, only the child is handed over. The Maika governor pretends not to notice this breach of law." Sati shook her head. She had lived in Meluha for more than 100 years, a few of which were in Maika as an infant. She had never known any of this. It was almost like she was discovering her seemingly upright nation anew. Her father had not been the only one to break the law. It appeared as if many Meluhans valued the comforts of their land more than their duty towards their children or towards observing Lord Ram's laws. Shiva looked ahead to see a large ship anchored in a massive lagoon. The waters were blocked on the far side by a dense grove. Having seen the grove of floating Sundari trees in Branga, Shiva assumed that these trees must also have free-floating roots. The route ahead seemed obvious. "I guess we have reached your secret lagoon. I assume the Narmada is beyond that grove." "There is a massive river beyond that grove, Baba," said Ganesh. "But it is not the Narmada. It is the Tapi. We have to cross to the other side. After that, it is a few more days' journey to Narmada." Shiva smiled. "The Lord Almighty has blessed this land with too many rivers. India can never run short of water." "Not if we abuse our rivers the way we are now abusing the Saraswati." Shiva nodded, silently agreeing with Ganesh. Bhrigu tore open the letter. It was exactly what he had expected. The Vayuputras had excommunicated him. "Lord Bhrigu, it has been brought to our attention that Devi Astras were loaded onto a fleet of ships in Karachappa. Investigations have led to the regrettable conclusion that you manufactured them, using materials that were given to you strictly for research. While we understand that you would never misuse the weapons expressly banned by our god, Lord Rudra, we cannot allow the unauthorized transport of these weapons to go unpunished. You are therefore prohibited from ever entering Pareha or interacting with a Vayuputra again. We do hope you will honor the greater promise that every friend of a Vayuputra makes to Lord Rudra, that of never using the Devi Astras. It is the expectation of the council that you will surrender the weapons at once to Vayuputra security." What surprised Bhrigu was that the note had been signed by the Mitra, leader of the council. It was rare for the Mitra to sign orders personally. Usually it was done by one of the Amartya Shpand, the 6 deputies on the council. The Vayuputras were clearly taking this very seriously. But Brigu believed that he had not broken the law. He had already written to the Vayuputras that they were making the institution of the Nilkant a mockery by not acting against the self-appointed impostor. But alas, the Vayuputras had done nothing. However, he could see how they would think he had misused their research material. Ironically, he had not. Even if he had got over his qualms about using that material, Brigu knew there was simply not enough to make the quantity of Devi Astras that were needed. He had made his own stockpile of such weapons using materials he himself had compiled over the years. Perhaps that was the reason why they did not have the destructive potency of the Vayuputra material. They had entire laboratories, whereas Brigu worked alone. Brigu sighed. He had used all the weapons that he had manufactured. The only mystery was whether they had achieved their purpose, whether the Nilkant had been assassinated. Talking to Daksha was an exercise in futility. He seemed to be in a state of shock since the rupture of his relations with his daughter. Brigu had sent off another ship, manned by men drawn from Dilipa's army, to the mouth of the Godavari to investigate the matter. But it would be months before he knew what had happened. "Anything else, my lord?" asked the attendant. Brigu dismissed her with an absent-minded wave. Perhaps the job was done. Maybe the Nilkant was no more. But it was also possible that Brigu's ships had failed. Even worse, the Nilkant may have been persuaded by the Nagas and was plotting to turn the people against the Somras. Nothing was certain till he received news of the 5 ships he had sent earlier to attack Shiva's convoy. For now, much as he disliked living in Devagiri, he had no choice but to wait. He had to stay till he knew the Somras was safe. He believed India's future was at stake. Brigu took a deep breath and went back into a meditative trance. Shiva's convoy had covered ground quickly after crossing the Tapi and was waiting at the edge of another secret lagoon while the Nagas prepared to set sail. Beyond the floating grove guarding this lagoon flowed the mighty Narmada, mandated by Lord Manu as the southern border of the Sapt Sindhu, the land of the 7 rivers. "How much further, Dada?" "Not too far, Karthik. Just a few more weeks," answered Ganesh. "We will sail east up the Narmada for a few days, then march on foot through the passes of the great Vindhya mountains till we reach the Chambal river. We would then have to sail for only a few days down the Chambal to reach Ujjain." Sati watched the sailors pull the gangway plank towards the rudimentary dock, preparing the ship for loading. She wished that her sister Kali had accompanied them on this journey. But she also knew that being a queen, Kali had many responsibilities in Panchavati. Her thoughts were interrupted by the ship's gangway plank landing on the dock with a loud thud. Parvateshwar, Anandamai, Bhagirath and Ayurvati were dining together in the late afternoon. They had just entered the first of 5 clearings on the Dandakaranya road from Panchavati. The road led to the hidden lagoon on the Madhumati in Branga. Accompanied by the convoy of 1,600 soldiers that had set out with Shiva more than a year ago, they were marching back to Kashi to await Shiva's return. Bhagirath looked at the 5 paths in wonder. Only one of these was correct, while the others were decoys that would lead trespassers to their doom. "These Nagas are obsessive about security." Anandamai looked up. "Can we blame them? Do not forget, it was this attitude that saved our lives when those ships attacked us on the Godavari." "True," said Bhagirath. "The Nagas will no doubt prove to be good allies. Their loyalty to the Nilkant isn't suspect, even though the reasons might well be. When the moment of truth is upon us, all will have to answer a simple question. Will they fight the world for the Nilkant? I know I will." Anandamai's eyes flashed as she looked at Parvateshwar and then back at Bhagirath, chiding him. "Get back to your food, little brother." Parvateshwar looked at Anandamai with a tortured expression. "I don't think the Paramatma will be so unkind to me. He could not have made me wait for more than a century to find my living God, only to force me to choose between my country and him. I'm sure the Almighty will find a way to ensure that Maluha and the Lord Nilkant are not on opposite sides." Parvateshwar's sad smile told Anandamai he himself did not believe that. She touched her husband's shoulder gently. Bhagirath played with his roti absent-mindedly. He was beginning to believe they could not count on Parvateshwar. That would be a huge loss for the Nilkant's army. Parvateshwar's strategic abilities had the capacity to turn the tide in any war. Ayavati looked at Parvateshwar with sympathy. She could identify with his inner conflict. In her case, though, a decision had emerged that sat comfortably in her heart. Her emperor had committed heinous acts which dishonored Meluha. This was no longer the country she had loved and admired all her life. She knew in her heart that Lord Ram would not have condoned the immorality that Meluha had descended into under Daksha's watch. Her path was clear. In a fight between Meluha and Shiva, she would choose the Nilkant, for he would set things right in Meluha as well. The Naga ship was anchored close to the Chambal shore. Shiva, Sati, Ganesh and Karthik climbed down rope ladders to the large boat that had been tied to the ship's anchor line. Brahaspati, Nandi and Parshuram followed them, accompanied by 10 Naga soldiers. When everyone had disembarked, they began to row ashore. The Vasudevs being even more secretive than the Nagas, Shiva did not expect to find any sign of habitation close to the river. Almost touching the river bank, a wall of dense foliage blocked the view beyond. Weeds had spread over the gentle Chambal waters, making rowing a back-breaking task. Ganesh navigated the boat towards a slender clearing between 2 immense palm trees. Shiva could sense something unnatural about the clearing, but couldn't put his finger on it. He turned towards Karthik, who was staring at the clearing as well. "Baba, look at the trees behind the clearing," said Karthik. "You'll have to bend down to my level." As Shiva bent low, the image became clear. The trees behind the clearing were organized unnaturally, given the dense, uncontrolled growth surrounding it. Placed equidistant, they seemed to grow in height as one looked further away. This was because the ground itself sloped upward in a gentle gradient. It was obviously not a natural hillock. A majority of the trees behind the clearing were the gulmohar, their flaming orange flowers suggestive of fire. Shiva blinked at what appeared to be an optical illusion. He suddenly stood up, rocking the boat as Sati and Ganesh reached out to hold him steady. The gulmohar trees had been placed in a specific pattern that was visible from a certain distance as one placed oneself directly in front of the small clearing between the twin palms. It was in the shape of a flame, a specific symbol that Shiva recognized. "Fravashi," whispered Shiva. Surprised, Ganesh asked, "How do you know that term, Baba?" Shiva looked at Ganesh and then back at the gulmohar trees. The pattern had disappeared. Shiva sat down and turned towards Ganesh. "How do you know that term?" "It's a Vayuputra term. It represents the feminine spirit of Lord Rudra, which has the power to assist us in doing what is right. We are free to either accept it or reject it, but the spirit never refuses to help. Never."